At some point, a few people notice something unsettling about their daily routine. They wake up and instinctively reach for their phone before they are even fully awake. Minutes pass as they scroll through notifications, messages, and short pieces of content. What begins as a quick check slowly turns into a habit that follows them throughout the entire day. Notifications interrupt their focus. Small bursts of digital entertainment fill every quiet moment. Waiting in line, sitting in a car, taking a break from work. Every pause becomes an opportunity to unlock the screen again. None of these actions feel particularly harmful on their own. Yet by the end of the day, their mind feels strangely exhausted. It's not the exhaustion that comes from meaningful work or deep concentration. Instead, it's a scattered kind of fatigue that builds from constant stimulation and divided attention. That's when a realization begins to form. Much of their attention is no longer under their control. It is quietly being guided by the design of the apps they open every day. Instead of simply promising themselves to reduce screen time, a small number of people decide to take a more radical step. They remove the source entirely. Social media apps disappear from their phone. Late-night browsing stops. The endless habit of refreshing feeds slowly fades out of their routine. What once filled hours of their day suddenly vanishes. The first days feel unusual. Silence replaces the constant buzz of notifications. Free moments appear where content used to be. The brain reacts with restlessness, almost like something important is missing. Hands reach for the phone without thinking, only to remember there is nothing left to check. This reaction isn't a sign of weakness, it is simply the brain adjusting to a different rhythm. Modern digital platforms train the brain to expect stimulation at a rapid pace. Every notification, every swipe, and every short clip provides a tiny signal of reward. The brain quickly learns to associate these signals with pleasure and anticipation. Over time, the mind adapts to that rhythm. It becomes used to receiving new stimulation every few seconds. When that stimulation is removed, ordinary moments suddenly feel quiet, slow, and sometimes even boring. But if someone stays away from that cycle long enough, something begins to shift. During the first week, there is often a strong urge to check the phone repeatedly. The mind searches for the quick excitement it was used to. This is simply the brain adjusting to the absence of instant rewards. Yet after some time, the intensity of those urges starts to decline. Attention slowly returns, and the mind becomes calmer. Activities that once felt too slow begin to regain their appeal. Reading a few pages of a book becomes easier to focus on. Conversations feel more present because attention is no longer divided between people and screens. Even simple experiences, like walking outside, cooking a meal, or concentrating on a project, begin to feel satisfying again. Nothing about the outside world has changed. What has changed is the brain's reward system slowly stabilizing itself. People who maintain this change usually do not rely on willpower alone. Instead of constantly resisting temptation, they modify their environment so the habit becomes harder to repeat. The phone no longer sits beside the bed at night. Distracting apps are removed rather than hidden in folders. Platforms designed for endless scrolling are no longer easily accessible. These small environmental changes make a powerful difference. The reason is simple. The brain often reacts to cues before the behavior even begins. The sight of an app icon or the sound of a notification can trigger anticipation. When the brain expects something interesting to appear, it releases dopamine before the reward even arrives. This anticipation loop is one of the reasons digital habits feel so automatic. By removing the cues that trigger the cycle, the craving slowly weakens. However, the people who succeed long-term do more than remove distractions. They replace them with other forms of engagement. The brain still needs rewarding experiences. Without them, motivation begins to fade. Instead of relying on instant stimulation, these individuals build slower sources of satisfaction. Learning new skills, exercising, writing, creating projects, or working deeply on something meaningful begin to fill the space that endless scrolling once occupied. These activities also trigger dopamine, but in a very different pattern. Instead of quick spikes followed by sudden drops, they produce gradual increases in motivation and a more stable sense of progress. The satisfaction grows slowly over time. Effort leads to improvement, and improvement becomes its own reward. Another important transformation occurs during this process, and it is more psychological than neurological. The people who sustain this change stop viewing it as a temporary challenge. Instead of constantly telling themselves they are trying to avoid scrolling, their mindset becomes simpler. That behavior just isn't part of their life anymore. Their identity shifts. When a behavior conflicts with a person's sense of identity, maintaining the change requires far less effort. Someone who sees themselves as a reader naturally spends time reading. Someone who identifies as a focused worker protects their attention more carefully. In the same way, individuals who step away from constant digital consumption begin to see themselves as people who value their attention. As weeks turn into months, many people notice a surprising benefit. Their attention span begins to recover. Without constant interruptions from quick digital rewards, the brain becomes capable of sustained focus again. Activities that require patience begin to feel immersive rather than exhausting. Long conversations become interesting again. Creative projects hold attention for extended periods. Work that once felt overwhelming becomes engaging. Psychologists often describe this state as flow. Flow occurs when attention becomes deeply immersed in a meaningful task. In this state, challenge and skill align, and the brain experiences a steady stream of reward signals that reinforce motivation and learning. Time seems to pass more quickly, and the activity itself becomes satisfying. There is also an unexpected side effect once the brain adapts to this calmer rhythm. Returning to the old pattern of endless scrolling can suddenly feel unpleasant. Someone who has spent weeks away from constant digital stimulation may try it again briefly and notice how overwhelming it feels. The rapid pace of content, the constant novelty, and the non-stop stimulation can leave the mind feeling scattered and overstimulated. What once felt entertaining now feels excessive, almost like mental noise. In a culture that constantly promotes productivity hacks, optimization techniques, and new tools for managing distractions, the people who maintain real focus often take a far simpler approach. Instead of adding more strategies to control their habits, they remove the sources of distraction themselves. They do not attempt to perfectly balance their screen time. They eliminate the most addictive elements entirely. Ultimately, the individuals who step away from constant digital stimulation are not extraordinary. They are not immune to temptation, and they do not possess unlimited willpower. What they do differently is surprisingly simple. They tolerate the uncomfortable adjustment period, they replace shallow rewards with deeper and more meaningful ones, and they reshape their identity around the behaviors they want to keep. What begins as a small decision to remove one distracting habit gradually transforms the way their brain experiences reward, attention, and satisfaction. Over time, they discover something powerful. Much of what once felt necessary for entertainment was never essential at all.